Echoes from Memphis, Drifting Through the Global Internet Underground. Part 1. When Underground Sound Escaped Geography. Originally published by Afterhours Archive 613. This audio edition is adapted from the original written article. Late at night, somewhere far outside Memphis, Tennessee, a teenager scrolls through drifting clips, gym edits, underground playlists, or distorted car videos online. Heavy bass pulses through phone speakers. Cowbells echo beneath clipped vocals pulled from decades-old recordings. The atmosphere feels immediate, hypnotic, and strangely nostalgic, even for listeners who never experienced the original scene that inspired it. Many encountered the sound long before they understood where it came from. Years before phonk playlists flooded Spotify recommendations, before TikTok accelerated underground music discovery, and before drifting edits became part of internet-native music culture, Memphis rap existed inside a far more localized ecosystem. During the early to mid-1990s, artists and producers such as DJ Paul, Juicy J, DJ Squeaky, DJ Zerk, DJ Spanish Fly, Tommy Wright III, Gangsta Pat, Al Capone, Kingpin Skinny Pimp, and groups including 3-6 Mafia and the Scandalous Playaz helped shape a raw and deeply regional underground sound built largely outside mainstream industry infrastructure. Much of the music moved through cassette tape trading networks, trunk sales, flea markets, independent shops, local DJs, and low-budget recording setups assembled through necessity rather than major label support. The production often sounded distorted, eerie, aggressive, hypnotic, and emotionally direct. It was not built around mainstream polish. It was about atmosphere, regional identity, experimentation, storytelling, and speaking openly through music in ways that reflected the realities surrounding the scene at the time. At the time, very little about Memphis rap suggested it would eventually evolve into one of the internet's most globally redistributed underground influences. Yet decades later, fragments of that regional sound would reappear everywhere. Inside drifting videos from Eastern Europe. Inside Brazilian street edits. Inside late-night YouTube visualizers. Inside gaming montages. Inside gym playlists generated by recommendation algorithms. Inside thousands of independent producers working from bedrooms, laptops, and home studios across the world. That transformation says as much about the evolution of the internet as it does about music itself. As explored throughout the Before the Algorithm series, internet culture fundamentally changed how underground scenes survive, evolve, and spread. Discovery became increasingly decentralized from traditional gatekeepers. Geography became less restrictive. Music communities evolved from relying entirely on labels, radio stations, physical scenes, or major media infrastructure. File-sharing platforms, internet forums, streaming services, recommendation systems, and social media ecosystems reshaped how culture traveled online. Not every regional sound adapted equally to that transition. Memphis rap, however, did. Part of that adaptability came from the music's emotional architecture. The lo-fi textures, distorted vocals, hypnotic repetition, horror-inspired aesthetics, heavy bass lines, and stripped-down production translated unusually well into internet-native environments. The music carried its atmosphere immediately, even when detached from its original historical context. That distinction matters. The internet rarely preserves underground culture in perfectly archival form. More often, it redistributes fragments of scenes through new emotional, visual, and algorithmic environments. Sounds become detached from geography and rebuilt through reinterpretation, remix culture, memes, aesthetics, short-form content, gaming communities, and recommendation systems. By the early internet era of the 2000s, uploads, ripped MP3 files, peer-to-peer sharing platforms, internet forums, YouTube reposts, and underground music blogs had already begun circulating Memphis recordings far beyond their original local environment. Many listeners discovered the music through low-quality uploads, compilation videos, mislabeled tracks, repost channels, or fragmented archives disconnected from the original cassette-era context. Even in incomplete form, the atmosphere remained recognizable. Rapidly and often unknowingly, Memphis rap entered global internet circulation at exactly the right moment. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, music production had become dramatically more accessible than it had been during the original cassette era underground. Affordable software, cracked digital audio workstations, YouTube tutorials, downloadable drum kits, online forums, and increasingly powerful home computers lowered the barrier to entry for independent producers worldwide. One of the most influential tools during this transition was FL Studio, a digital audio workstation originally released in 1997 by Belgian company Imageline. Unlike many expensive studio programs of the era, FL Studio became widely accessible to independent creators and eventually developed a strong reputation within internet-based producer communities. Its relatively approachable interface, pattern-based workflow, and compatibility with home computers made it especially popular among emerging producers experimenting with hip-hop, trap, phonk, and electronic music from bedrooms and home studios rather than professional recording facilities. What once required expensive studio access could now be assembled from bedrooms, basements, dorm rooms, and laptops, connected to internet communities rather than physical local scenes. Producers could experiment, upload instantly, distribute globally, and learn from one another without industry permission. At the same time, platforms like YouTube, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, and later Spotify accelerated underground circulation in ways earlier music ecosystems never could. Spotify's recommendation-driven infrastructure, which expanded significantly during the 2010s, helped normalize algorithmic music discovery on a massive scale. Recommendation systems increasingly connected geographically disconnected listeners through mood, atmosphere, visual aesthetics, and listening behavior rather than regional proximity alone. This fundamentally altered how underground music evolved. Scenes no longer needed to remain geographically centralized to feel culturally connected. A producer in Russia could discover Memphis samples through YouTube uploads. A creator in Brazil could reinterpret those sounds through local rhythms and internet aesthetics. A listener in France could encounter the genre through drifting compilations, gaming videos, or algorithmic playlists without ever touching traditional music media. The underground became increasingly global while still feeling emotionally niche. This is one of the reasons phonk evolved so differently from many earlier internet microgenres. It was not simply a genre emerging from one city or scene. It became a decentralized reinterpretation ecosystem built from shared atmosphere, sampling traditions, internet participation, and algorithmic visibility. That evolution also complicated questions surrounding authenticity. As phonk expanded internationally, debates emerged around commercialization, oversaturation, historical awareness, and cultural lineage. Some listeners viewed newer drift-oriented sounds as disconnected from Memphis roots. Others saw globalization itself as evidence that the original influence remained alive and evolving rather than forgotten. In reality, both tensions can exist simultaneously. Internet culture often preserves influence while transforming context and historical understanding. The result is rarely clean preservation. It is evolution through redistribution. This pattern extends far beyond phonk alone. Throughout internet music culture, regional underground scenes increasingly mutate once they enter global digital circulation. Sounds become detached from their original environments and reconstructed through new technologies, aesthetics, audiences, and emotional associations. Nu metal experienced similar cycles of internet rediscovery. So did vaporwave. So did witch house. So did countless underground electronic and alternative scenes, once considered niche, outdated, or geographically isolated. The internet did not erase underground culture. It changed the speed, scale, visibility, and fragmentation through which underground culture moves. Memphis rap became one of the clearest examples of that transformation. What began as localized underground expression eventually evolved into a globally recognizable internet atmosphere, not because geography disappeared entirely, but because digital ecosystems allowed regional sound to circulate farther, faster, and more continuously than previous generations of underground artists could have imagined. And once those sounds entered algorithmic circulation, they stopped belonging to only one place at a time. What followed was not simple preservation, but an entirely new phase of underground music culture shaped by internet participation, reinterpretation, and global digital infrastructure. Part 2. The producers, the packs, and the new underground infrastructure. By the mid to late 2010s, phonk had evolved far beyond isolated internet uploads and niche producer circles. What began as fragmented reinterpretations of Memphis rap was becoming something larger. A decentralized underground ecosystem built through platforms, producer communities, algorithms, visual culture, and shared digital infrastructure. The music no longer spread only through songs. It spread through files. This distinction became one of the defining characteristics of modern internet-native music culture. Earlier generations of underground music depended heavily on physical circulation. Cassette tapes, CDs, local scenes, flyers, record shops, radio stations, and regional word-of-mouth networks all helped shape how underground communities formed and survived. Even during the Napster and LimeWire era explored throughout the Before the Algorithm series, most digital sharing still revolved primarily around finished songs. Producer culture transformed that dynamic entirely. By the 2010s, online underground ecosystems increasingly revolved around downloadable infrastructure itself. Drum kits, sample packs, vocal stems, presets, MIDI files, project templates, cracked plugins, and production tutorials began circulating through YouTube links, forums, Discord servers, Reddit communities, Telegram groups, Google Drive folders, BeatStars pages, and private producer networks. In many ways, drum kit culture became the production-era equivalent of peer-to-peer sharing systems such as Napster, LimeWire, and early torrent ecosystems. The underground was no longer only sharing music. It was sharing the tools used to make it. For younger producers entering phonk, accessibility mattered enormously. Expensive studio environments were no longer required to participate. A laptop, internet connection, DAW, and downloadable sounds were often enough to begin experimenting. YouTube tutorials accelerated this even further, creating an environment where producers could teach themselves techniques that previously required mentorship, formal studio access, or years inside local music scenes. The barriers separating listener, fan, and creator became increasingly blurred. A teenager discovering phonk through drifting videos or gaming edits could transition from listener to producer within weeks. Downloadable drum kits and templates dramatically lowered the technical barriers to entry. Entire subgenres evolved through this accessibility. At the same time, accessibility introduced new tensions surrounding ownership, attribution, and copyright enforcement. Much like Napster disrupted debates surrounding music piracy and digital redistribution during the late 1990s and early 2000s, producer ecosystems created similar complications surrounding samples, reused sounds, vocal clips, and downloadable production assets circulating online at enormous speed. The internet had changed not only how underground music circulated, it had changed how underground music was created. This transformation accelerated funk's global expansion at extraordinary speed. Russian producers began developing darker, aggressive drift-oriented reinterpretations built for car culture videos, racing edits, and high-intensity online content. Brazilian funk evolved differently, often incorporating regional rhythmic influences, Bale funk energy, and hyper-distorted production aesthetics. Across Europe, North America, Latin America, and parts of Asia, localized reinterpretations continued emerging through internet-native communities, connected less by geography than by atmosphere and algorithmic proximity. Platforms amplified this process continuously. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, YouTube recommendation systems had already begun pushing listeners deeper into increasingly specific underground niches. SoundCloud encouraged rapid experimentation and direct uploads throughout the 2010s, while Spotify playlists increasingly transformed mood and atmosphere into searchable listening categories. By the late 2010s and early 2020s, TikTok accelerated exposure even further through short-form repetition, trends, edits, and visual association. In many cases, listeners encountered funk less as a clearly defined genre and more as an emotional or visual atmosphere tied to specific internet experiences. Late-night driving videos, gym motivation edits, street racing compilations, gaming montages, cyberpunk-inspired visuals, anime edits, doom scrolling through algorithmically curated feeds at 2 in the morning. The atmosphere became inseparable from the distribution system itself. This also contributed to one of the internet era's most complicated tensions: accessibility versus originality. As downloadable drum kits, reusable cowbells, vocal samples, and production presets circulated more aggressively online, funk became easier to reproduce stylistically. The same infrastructure that allowed underground participation to flourish also accelerated sonic homogenization in some corners of the genre. Certain production patterns became increasingly repetitive as sounds recycled rapidly across thousands of tracks, uploaded daily across streaming platforms and social media. Questions surrounding ownership became increasingly complicated as well. Many producer packs circulated through legal gray areas. Memphis vocal samples, a cappellas, loops, and reworked sounds frequently appeared inside downloadable kits shared between producers online. Some distributions were unofficial reposts. Others operated through, inspired by branding or partially modified sample structures, designed to avoid direct copyright enforcement. Yet the speed of internet culture often made meaningful enforcement extremely difficult. It still does. As online music ecosystems expanded globally, tracking who used specific samples, where sounds originated, how files were redistributed, or whether permissions existed became increasingly difficult to manage in practice. In many ways, the internet was evolving faster than ownership systems could realistically adapt. This mirrored many of the same tensions that defined earlier digital music eras. Napster disrupted ownership through song sharing. LimeWire accelerated uncontrolled redistribution. Torrent culture decentralized access even further. Drum kit culture extended similar dynamics into the production process itself. The internet was no longer simply redistributing finished music. it was redistributing the building blocks of music creation. At the same time, phonk's explosive visibility created complicated authenticity debates throughout underground communities. Some longtime listeners and Memphis rap supporters viewed newer commercialized drift phonk as disconnected from the original culture that inspired it. Others argued that evolution, reinterpretation, and globalization were inevitable outcomes once regional underground music entered digital circulation. Neither perspective fully captures the entire reality. Internet culture rarely preserves scenes exactly as they originally existed. More often, it fragments, redistributes, commercializes, reshapes, and recontextualizes them simultaneously. Phonk became one of the clearest examples of this phenomenon. What emerged was not simply a genre, but an evolving digital ecosystem shaped by algorithms, aesthetics, accessibility, reinterpretation, global participation, and platform infrastructure operating continuously across borders. And as visibility increased, so did questions surrounding attribution, preservation, ownership, and historical memory. In the process of global reinterpretation, the Internet amplified Memphis' influence worldwide, but it also began reshaping who audiences recognized, remembered, and associated with the sound itself. Part 3. Algorithms, Visibility, and the Collapse of the Underground Boundary. By the early 2020s, phonk had moved far beyond its origins as a niche Internet subculture. What once circulated through fragmented producer circles, repost channels, drifting compilations, and underground forums was now reaching millions of listeners daily across Spotify playlists, TikTok edits, YouTube recommendations, gaming culture, fitness content, and social media algorithms. The underground had not disappeared. It re-emerged anew. But the boundaries separating underground and mainstream culture had become increasingly unstable. For decades, underground music scenes often depended on limited visibility. Scarcity helped define identity. Finding rare tapes, obscure forums, hidden record shops, local scenes, or difficult-to-access music communities created a sense of participation tied directly to discovery itself. Limited exposure was often part of the culture. Algorithms disrupted that relationship entirely. Recommendation systems no longer required listeners to actively search for underground music. Platforms increasingly pushed niche sounds directly into algorithmically curated feeds based on mood, behavior, watch time, engagement, and listening habits. Discovery became passive as much as intentional. This fundamentally altered how underground visibility functioned online. A listener no longer needed deep historical knowledge of Memphis rap, phonk forums, or underground producer culture to encounter the sound. Spotify playlists, TikTok trends, YouTube autoplay systems, gym edits, drifting videos, gaming montages, and short-form content continuously introduced phonk aesthetics to entirely new audiences at massive scale. The atmosphere traveled faster than the history attached to it. In many ways, phonk became perfectly optimized for algorithmic circulation. The distorted bass translated well through phone speakers and short-form video clips. Aggressive energy matched workout culture, drifting edits, gaming content, and fast-paced visual media. The music carried a recognizable atmosphere almost immediately, even within extremely short exposure windows. This mattered enormously in an internet ecosystem increasingly driven by speed, repetition, and visual association. Platforms rewarded music that generated immediate emotional response. Phonk delivered that quickly. At the same time, streaming platforms and recommendation systems transformed visibility into a measurable public performance. Monthly listeners, follower counts, playlist placements, repost metrics, likes, Shares, comments, and verification badges increasingly shaped how audiences perceived legitimacy online. Perception itself became the infrastructure. The internet had not eliminated gatekeepers. It had replaced many traditional gatekeepers with new algorithmic systems built around visibility, engagement, retention, and platform performance. For independent artists and producers, this created both opportunity and pressure simultaneously. On one hand, decentralized distribution allowed creators to upload music globally without requiring major label infrastructure. A producer working from a bedroom studio could theoretically reach international audiences through TikTok exposure, YouTube algorithms, Spotify playlists, repost channels, Discord communities, or viral edits. On the other hand, visibility itself became increasingly tied to platform optimization. Artists were no longer competing only through music. They were competing within attention economies. Upload frequency, visual branding, algorithmic consistency, short-form content production, audience retention, social media engagement, metadata optimization, and platform adaptability all became increasingly important factors in determining visibility online. This accelerated burnout throughout many internet-native creative communities. The pressure to remain visible often became continuous and demanding beyond the natural order. Songs became content. Artists became brands. Visibility became labor. At the same time, internet culture continued accelerating rediscovery cycles across older underground genres and aesthetics. Nu metal resurged through meme culture before evolving back into genuine fandom. Vaporwave fragmented into multiple reinterpretations. Witch house aesthetics reappeared inside visual internet culture years, after many considered the genre culturally dormant. Phonk followed similar patterns while evolving into something unusually global. What made phonk different was not simply its popularity, but the scale of its international reinterpretation ecosystem. Russian drift phonk, Brazilian phonk, Memphis revivalism, hyper-aggressive gym phonk, atmospheric lo-fi phonk, house-influenced phonk, and countless hybrid variations all emerged simultaneously across interconnected digital spaces. As phonk expanded further into internet culture, its boundaries with adjacent electronic ecosystems also became increasingly fluid. Elements of house music, EDM festival culture, rave aesthetics, electronic remix culture, and high-energy internet visual media increasingly intersected with phonk's aggressive atmosphere and distorted production style. In some spaces, phonk remained closely tied to Memphis sampling traditions and underground hip-hop lineage. In others, it evolved into hybridized electronic subgenres shaped more by internet energy, visual intensity, and algorithmic momentum than by strict genre boundaries alone. The genre no longer belonged to one region, one platform, or even one singular sound. It had become an internet-native cultural ecosystem, constantly reshaped through participation itself. This complicated historical memory even further. As phonk expanded into streaming culture and social media visibility, many listeners encountered the genre without understanding its deeper historical connections to Memphis rap and earlier underground Southern hip-hop scenes. Viral edits and algorithmic playlists often prioritized mood and engagement over historical context. The sound remained visible. The lineage became less visible. This tension reflects one of the internet era's larger cultural contradictions. Digital platforms preserve enormous amounts of information, while simultaneously fragmenting historical understanding through speed, repetition, and decontextualized circulation. Music travels farther and faster than ever before, but historical attribution does not always travel with it. Internet culture, remembers differently than previous generations of music communities. Sometimes accurately, sometimes partially, sometimes only aesthetically. And yet, despite these tensions, Memphis' influence never fully disappeared beneath the surface, even if it is not always recognized immediately. The atmosphere remained recognizable. The sampling lineage remained traceable. The influence continued echoing across platforms, producers, edits, playlists, and reinterpretations worldwide. The underground had not vanished. It had evolved into something decentralized, persistent, algorithmically amplified, and globally interconnected in ways previous generations of underground artists could scarcely have imagined. What began decades earlier through regional tapes, local DJs, low-budget recording setups, and underground circulation had ultimately transformed into one of the internet era's clearest examples of how digital ecosystems reshape music, identity, participation, and cultural memory simultaneously. And somewhere beneath millions of playlists, reposts, edits, algorithms, and endless streams of content, echoes of Memphis continued moving through the global internet underground. This audio edition was adapted from the original written article published by Afterhours Archive 613. References and source materials are available in the original written article published by Afterhours Archive 613.